The night is old when the best stories begin. Not old like midnight, when the young still dance and the palm wine still passes from hand to hand, and the lanterns are bright in the compound. Old like the hour before dawn, when the fire has burned down to its last red eye, and the only people still awake are the ones whose chests will not allow them to sleep. The ones who carry something. The ones who are waiting for morning to confirm what they already know. This is that hour. Sit close. There is a village called Asokwa. It is not so large that a stranger goes unnoticed, and not so small that the people have stopped being surprised by the things life brings to their door. It sits between the red laterite road and the river, in that part of the country where the baobab trees stand at the edge of the fields like patient elders. Their arms spread wide and their roots deep, and their silence full of opinion. The soil in Asokwa is dark and generous. The women grow cassava and groundnut and garden eggs. The men tend cocoa and yam. On Tuesdays, market day, the road fills with noise and color and the smell of smoked fish and fresh ginger, and the whole village becomes briefly, loudly, joyfully itself. But this story does not begin on a market day. It begins on a dry season Thursday, when the harmattan had arrived 2 weeks ahead of its time and covered everything in Asokwa with a thin white dust. The leaves, the zinc rooftops, the faces of children playing football in the compound, the surface of the river, which no longer shimmered but lay flat and pale as old cloth. The kind of dry that makes the air taste of distance, when as if something is coming from very far away and does not intend to announce itself. It begins with a woman named Akosua Frempong. If this story is already warming your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to Village Heart, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love knowing our little village reaches so far. Akosua was 48 years old. She was the kind of woman that a village depends on without fully acknowledging it. The kind whose absence, if it were ever to happen, would leave a silence that no one could quite name, but everyone would feel. She woke before the roosters. She kept her compound swept. She knew which child in the village had a cough and which herb to boil for it. She remembered the birthdays of other people's children better than they remembered them themselves. She was not remarkable in any way that the world outside Asokwa would have noticed, and she would have thought it strange and slightly embarrassing if anyone had tried to tell her otherwise. Her husband Kofi had died 4 years ago. A quiet man, a good man. A man who could mend anything with his hands and who laughed at his own jokes more than anyone else did, and whose laugh, when it came, was so unexpected and so full that it forced you to join it whether you intended to or not. He had died on a Sunday morning. He had gone to sleep on Saturday night and had simply not woken up. The doctor from the district hospital came the next day and used the phrase sudden cardiac event and then drove away, and Akosua had stood in her compound with those 3 words and the weight of everything they meant. Worse, and she had understood in that moment what it was to feel the ground shift under a life that you believed was steady. Kofi had left behind 2 things: a daughter named Maame, who was 16 now and sharp and beautiful, and full of the kind of questions that made you either laugh or press your hand to your chest depending on the day, and a debt, not a dramatic debt, not the kind that arrives in cars with official papers, just the ordinary grinding kind. A loan taken for a new well that had not been finished. A debt owed to the cooperative for seed purchased on credit, a small amount here and a small amount there that together made a weight that pressed on Akosua's shoulders every morning when she woke and every evening when she sat in her compound after Mommy had gone to bed and the village had gone quiet, and there was nothing between her and her thoughts. She made shea butter. Had been making it since she was 13 years old, learning from her mother the way the knowledge passed, hands over hands, one generation guiding the next, through the cracking of the nuts, the roasting, the pounding, the kneading. She sold it in the market on Tuesdays and at a shop in the district capital twice a month. It was good butter. People came from other villages to buy it, but it was not enough. It was almost enough. The way a meal that leaves you just slightly hungry is almost enough. You are grateful for it. Or you do not waste it, but the hunger stays. She had a small plot of land behind the house, a strip of cocoa that Kofi had planted and that she tended alone now. She had applied twice to the district agricultural office for the support payment that widows were entitled to. Both applications had disappeared into the same quiet, bureaucratic darkness into which things in that office always disappeared, like stones dropped into deep water, no sound coming back. She did not complain about this. She had not been raised to complain. Her mother had taught her that complaint without action was simply noise, and that the world was already full of noise, and that what it needed, what it had always needed, was the kind of woman who got up in the morning and did the thing that needed doing whether or not anyone was watching. So Akosua got up. She did the thing. She kept the compound swept. She boiled the medicine for other people's children. She remembered the birthdays. But sometimes on those evenings after Maame was asleep, she sat in her compound under the sky. The enormous African sky that in the dry season is so thick with stars it seems almost heavy. And she allowed herself quietly, with no audience, to feel how tired she was. Not the tiredness of her body, which was strong and accustomed to hard work. The other tiredness, the one that comes from carrying something alone for a long time. The one that makes you, just occasionally, look at the stars and wonder if anyone up there can see how hard you are trying. This was Akosua. This was her life. And it was a good life. She believed that. She genuinely believed it. But it was a life lived at the edge of its own resources, always a little short of the margin, always managing. And it was into this life, on that dusty Thursday afternoon, that Baba Kwame Asante walked. He had been sitting at the bus station in the district capital since 8 o'clock in the morning. The bus station was not the kind of place that was comfortable to sit in for any length of time. It was a wide, open, noise-filled space of red dust and exhaust fumes and vendors moving between parked trotros with trays of pure water on their heads and men sleeping on their luggage, and children chasing each other between the wheels of vehicles, and the general restless energy of a place where everyone is going somewhere, except on this particular Thursday, one old man. His name was Kwame Asante. When he was 72 years old, he had been a primary school teacher for 31 years. He had taught the children of Asokwa in 3 neighboring villages, had taught some of them to read, had taught some of them to add up the columns of numbers that would later run their households, had taught some of them the history of their own people, the names of rivers and kings, the weight and meaning of where they came from. He was the kind of teacher that, many years later, grown men and women would mention in conversations with the quiet pride of someone naming a debt they are glad to owe. That teacher of ours, they would say, that Baba Kwame, he was something, he was something, he had been something. He sat on a low wooden bench at the edge of the bus station, in the thin shade of an awning that moved slightly in the Harmattan wind, and he held in his right hand a single ten-pesewa coin, just one, the smallest denomination there was, worth almost nothing, enough to buy almost nothing. His son Emmanuel had pressed it into his palm as he walked away. For the phone, Emmanuel had said, if you need to call someone. And then he had gotten into his car, the silver car with the tinted windows that Akosua and every other person in Asokwa who had seen it would have recognized as the car of someone who had decided, somewhere along the way, that wealth was a distance to be maintained, and he had driven away. And Baba Kwame had watched him go. He had watched the silver car until it merged with the traffic on the district road, and then was gone. And then he had looked down at the coin in his palm, and then he had sat down. That had been 8 o'clock in the morning. Much it was now past 2 in the afternoon. He had watched the bus station do what bus stations do. Fill and empty, fill and empty. People coming and going with purpose, with luggage, with destinations printed in their eyes. He had watched vendors sell water and bread and fried plantain. He had watched a young woman argue with a trotro driver about change. He had watched two small boys share a single piece of sugar cane, passing it back and forth between them with a generosity that was so natural, so unconsidered, that it made the old man's chest tighten in a way he did not try to analyze. He was wearing what he had been wearing when Emmanuel came to his room that morning and told him, in the careful, a businesslike tone of a man who has rehearsed his sentence and trimmed all the feeling out of it, that things had changed and he would need to make other arrangements. A dark blue cloth shirt, soft from many washings, dark trousers, his good leather sandals, which were not so good anymore, but were the best he had. He had a small bag, a green cloth bag with a drawstring top, that held his Bible, his reading glasses in their case, a change of clothes, and a small frame photograph of his wife Abina, who had died 3 years ago, and whose absence was the oldest and most faithful pain he carried. Cynthia had stood in the doorway of the room while Emmanuel spoke, his son's wife. She had stood with her arms folded and her face arranged in the expression of someone who is waiting patiently for a necessary thing to be finished. She had not said anything. She did not need to say anything. Her standing there, with that expression, said everything. Baba Kwame had looked at his son's face. He had looked for a long time. He had spent 31 years reading the faces of children, learning the difference between the child who did not understand and the child who understood but was afraid to try, and the child who had simply decided that the cost of trying was too high. He had been a good reader of faces. He read his son's face now, and what he found there was the thing he had been hoping not to find. Not cruelty exactly. Cruelty would have been easier in a way, something hot and clear that you could push against. What he found instead was something colder and more final. The face of someone who had made a decision a long time ago and had simply been waiting for the right moment to carry it out. He had picked up his green bag. He had walked out of the room without speaking. He had gotten into his son's car. He had not cried. He had not asked. He had not said, "After everything," or "Do you remember?" or "Your mother would be." He had looked out the window the whole drive and watched the city give way to the road, and the road give way to the countryside, and he had thought about Abina, who had died before any of this happened, which was one of the few mercies in the story. Abina would not have survived this, not the event itself, but the knowledge of what her son had become. And now he sat at the bus station with one coin and a green bag and 31 years of children's faces in his memory, and the harmattan moving in from the north, and the question of what to do next pressing on him like a hand on a sore place. He thought about who to call. He went through the list carefully. His brother was dead. His sister was in the north, and she had her own troubles, and he was not going to be a trouble on top of troubles. There was a colleague from the school, a man named Opanyin Nkrumah. But Opanyin Nkrumah had had a stroke last year, and his daughter had told him not to worry about visitors for now. There were the people of Asokwa, the village where he had taught for so many years, and where some of his former students still lived. But he had not been back to Asokwa in nearly 6 years. Emmanuel had moved them to the city after Abina died, and Baba Kwame had gone because that was what you did. You went with your family. You assumed family was the thing. He had assumed wrong. He turned the coin over in his fingers. It is a particular kind of loneliness, the loneliness of a man who has spent his life giving and now finds himself with no one to give to and no one offering anything in return. It does not announce itself loudly. It sits quietly. It has the patience of something that has always known it would arrive eventually and sees no need to hurry. Baba Kwame sat with it until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then he picked up his green bag, put the coin in his pocket, and began to walk. The road to Asokwa was 11 kilometers. He walked it in the Harmattan heat, slowly, because he was 72 years old and his right knee had been giving him trouble since the previous rainy season. The red road stretched ahead of him, narrow and empty in the afternoon heat, lined on both sides by dry grass and the occasional neem tree. The dust rose around his sandals with each step. Vehicles passed him sometimes, trucks loaded with plantain, trotros going in both directions, motorcycles, and none of them stopped. He did not ask them to. He walked the way a man walks when he has accepted that wherever he arrives, he will arrive in his own time, with whatever dignity is left to him, slowly, steadily, without rushing. The sun moved across the sky. His shadow changed direction. His knee ached. When he stopped once under a neem tree and rested for 10 minutes and looked at the photograph of a bena in his bag, and then he put it away and kept walking. He reached the edge of Asokwa just before sunset. He was seen before he spoke to anyone. This is how it works in a village. A stranger walking in from the road is observed before they are approached, assessed before they are greeted, filed in the mind of everyone who sees them under the category that seems most appropriate. A man in good clothes and purposeful stride might be a government official or a relative of someone important. A man carrying a box might be selling something. An old man, thin, dusty, walking slowly, carrying only a small green bag. The category for that is clear enough, and it is not a category that calls for welcome. Auntie Amma saw him first. She was sitting on her porch cracking groundnuts, and she watched him come down the road, and she noted the state of his sandals and the dust on his shirt, and the careful way he was moving, the way of a man whose body was done, but whose will had not yet agreed to be done. And she went inside and came back with her phone and called her neighbor Mercy to report that there was an old man on the road who looked like he had walked from somewhere far, and that someone ought to see what he wanted before he came into the compound areas. The village elder, Opanyin Boateng, a large man with the kind of authority that comes not from position alone, but from the fact that he has seen enough of life to have run out of patience for its smaller nonsenses, happened to be standing outside his house when Baba Kwame reached the first compound, and he looked at the old man. He looked at the bag. He looked at the sandals. "Old man," he said, "where are you going?" "I am looking for somewhere to rest," Baba Kwame said. His voice was quiet and even. "I used to teach at the school here. My name is Kwame Asante." Opanyin Boateng looked at him a moment longer. Then he said, "The school is closed for today, and the teachers who are here now are young ones who I don't think you know. I taught here many years ago. I am not looking for a teacher. I am looking for somewhere to rest." Opanyin Boateng's expression did not change. "We don't have a guest house." "I am not asking for a guest house." There was a pause, a long one. The kind of pause in which a man's face works through several calculations, and you can see some of them in the shifting of his eyes, and some of them you cannot see at all. "Go to the church," the elder said finally. "The pastor sometimes lets people rest there." He went back inside. The pastor was not home. His wife came to the door and looked at Baba Kwame and said her husband was at the district capital and wouldn't be back till Friday, and that she didn't have space for visitors. And she said it not unkindly, but with the firm efficiency of someone who has learned that the cost of softness is a compound full of strangers. A woman named Grace, who sold frozen drinks from a cooler outside her house, gave him a sachet of water when she saw how parched he was. She gave it for free, which was something, which was more than others had given. But when he asked if he could sit in her compound for a short while, she glanced toward her gate and said she had family coming, and maybe he should try down by the market. There was a bench there. He found the bench. He sat on it. The market was closed. It was Thursday, not Tuesday, and the square was empty in the early evening light. He sat and he looked at the sky, which was turning all the colors it turns in the dry season. that particular orange and violet burning that is both beautiful and melancholy, the sky of a day ending without having resolved itself. He had been sitting there for perhaps 30 minutes when he heard footsteps. Akosua had been on her way home from the Shea Butter Cooperative. She was tired. She was always tired at this hour. The productive tiredness of a body that has done its work, and she was carrying a plastic bag with yam and garden eggs from the market that she had bought on her way through. She was thinking about what to make for dinner, whether the garden eggs were soft enough for stew or whether she should make empathy, whether Maame had done her schoolwork, or whether she had spent the afternoon talking to the neighbor's boy in the way she had recently started spending the afternoon. She came around the corner of the market square, and she saw the old man on the bench. She stopped. Not because of anything dramatic. There was nothing dramatic to see. Just an old man sitting on a bench in the empty market square in the early evening, with a green bag by his feet and his hands folded in his lap and his eyes on the sky. But something made her stop. Some quality in the way he was sitting. Not resting, not waiting. Something more settled than both of those things. Something that was closer to having simply arrived at the end of what he knew how to do next. She stood and looked at him for a moment. She thought about Opanyan Botung, who would have told her to keep walking, that she didn't know this man, that she had her own troubles. She thought about the debt and the cooperative payment due at the end of the month, and the fact that her yam was getting heavy in her hand and Maame was probably hungry. She thought about all the very reasonable things that argued for walking past the market square and going home. Then she walked toward the bench. "Father," she said, the word of respect that you give to an elder you do not know. "Father, are you well?" He looked up at her. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had spent the day being looked through, being passed by, being sorted into the category of things that other people had decided they did not have room for. And then for a moment, his face did something that she would think about later, in the way you think about a small thing that turns out to have been the beginning of everything. He looked at her as if she was the first person who had truly seen him all day. "I have walked from the district capital," he said. "I am looking for somewhere to rest." She looked at the dust on his shirt. She looked at his sandals. She looked at his hands, folded in his lap. The hands of a man who has done a great deal of work in his life, hands that are shaped by use, by holding chalk and pens, and the shoulders of children who needed guiding. "Have you eaten?" she asked, and he was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. Akosua looked at the yam in her hand. She looked at the garden eggs. She thought about the debt and the cooperative, and Maame and the neighbor's boy. She thought about the things that argued for walking home. "Come," she said. "I have yam and garden eggs. It's not much, but there is enough for two." He stood slowly, the way a man stands when he has been sitting for a long time, and his body has grown acquainted with stillness. He picked up his green bag. He looked at her with that same expression. Not relief, something more careful than relief. The expression of someone who has learned not to trust relief too quickly. "I do not want to impose," he said. "You are not imposing," she said. "I am inviting you." He walked beside her. She adjusted her pace to his without thinking about it. The village evening moved around them. The sound of cooking fires starting, the smell of smoke and pepper, and someone frying fish nearby, a child shouting somewhere, a dog barking in response to the shouting. The ordinary sounds of a village settling into night. They walked without speaking for a moment. Then he said, "I used to teach at the school here, long ago." "Which school?" she asked. "The Asokwa MA primary." She looked at him sideways. "I went to that school," she said slowly. "What is your name?" "Kwame Asante." She stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the road and looked at him, and something moved across her face. Something that started as surprise, and then became something fuller, something that reached back through the years to a classroom and a man who had stood at a chalkboard every morning and who had made her, for the first time in her young life, feel that her thinking was worth something, that the words she put together were worth reading, that she was someone whose mind was worth developing. Baba Kwame, she said softly, not a question, a recognition. He looked at her. He looked more carefully. And then, slowly, through the dust and the years and the harmattan, he found her. Akosua Frempong, the girl who had sat in the third row and asked more questions than anyone, and who had written an essay about the river that he had kept for years in the drawer of his desk as an example of what a child's mind could do. Akosua, he said. They stood in the road looking at each other. The evening moved around them. Somewhere behind them the sun finished setting, and the sky above Asokwa went from violet to a deep starlit black. She picked up her bag. While she began walking again. He walked beside her, and neither of them spoke for the rest of the way to her compound, because some moments do not need words, and this was one of them. The moment of recognition between a teacher and his student, separated by 20 years and brought back together by a Thursday evening and a bench in an empty market square, and one woman's decision to stop. What she did not know yet was what that decision had set in motion. What she could not know yet was who she had brought home. None of us can see the whole story from the beginning. We can only see the next step, and the only question is whether we choose it with an open hand or a closed one. Akosua Frempong had always been a woman of open hands. And the night that was coming, the days and weeks and years that that night would grow into, were already rooted in that simple fact that she had stopped, that she had said, there is enough for two, that she had adjusted her pace to his without being asked. The compound gate opened. The fire was low in the cooking area. Maame looked up from her school books and saw the old man, and then looked at her mother with a question in her eyes. Set another place, Akosua said. Maame set another place, and Baba Kwame Asante sat down in Akosua Frempong's compound for the first time, and placed his green bag by his feet, and looked at the cooking fire, and felt, for the first time in a very long day, in a very long year, in a very long series of years, the particular warmth that is not the warmth of a fire, but the warmth of being somewhere that has decided, even temporarily, even without knowing who you are or why you came, to make room for you. He pressed his hands together. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said. Just that. 2 words, simple as a coin, worth everything. Outside, the harmattan wind moved through the baobab trees at the edge of the village. The stars above Asokwa were coming in, one by one, the way the truth always comes. Gradually, then all at once, until the whole sky is full of it, and you cannot imagine how you ever thought it was dark. But that was still ahead. Tonight there was only the fire, the yam, the garden eggs, the old teacher and the woman who had once sat in his third row, and the story, this one, and the kind that starts with a small thing and does not stop, had just begun. He stayed 3 days and then a week, and then it stopped being counted. Not because Akosua stopped noticing. She noticed everything. The cost of the extra candle, the extra portion of food, the fact that his knee needed soaking in warm water with salt each evening, and that she had begun doing this without being asked. The way you do things when a person has stopped being a guest and started being something else, something that does not have a clean name, but that you recognize when you feel it. She noticed all of it. She simply stopped measuring it against something else. He slept on a mat in the storeroom that she emptied and swept and hung a curtain across the doorway of. It was not large, it was clean and dry and out of the harmattan, and he said, and on the first night, that it was the best room he had been given in a long time. He said this without any attempt to make her feel anything. He said it the way a person states a fact they have simply observed, and the straightness of it, the absence of performance, was the thing that made her look away for a moment. In the mornings he rose before she did, which she discovered on the second day when she came out of her room to start the fire and found it already going, and a pot of water already heating, and Baba Kwame sitting on the low stool nearby with his Bible open on his knee and his reading glasses on, moving his lips slightly over the words the way people read when they are not reading for performance, but for something deeper and more private. He looked up when he heard her footstep. "I hope you don't mind," he said, is gesturing toward the fire. "I don't mind," she said. That was all. She sat down and they were quiet together in the early morning. The good kind of quiet that is not uncomfortable but simply shared. The quiet of two people who have separately learned that not every moment requires filling. And then Maame came out rubbing her eyes and the day began. Maame had regarded him with the particular watchfulness of a 16-year-old who understands more than she is given credit for. She had watched him the first evening from across the compound, cataloging him, the old bag, the worn sandals, the careful way he moved. And then she had brought him water without being asked and then gone back to her books. He had watched her from across the compound and return. On the second evening, he asked her what she was studying. "Mathematics," she said, and not warmly, not coldly, informational. "What part?" "Quadratic equations." "Are you finding them easy?" She looked at him sideways. "They are not easy." "May I see?" She brought her exercise book. He put on his reading glasses and looked at it in the firelight for a long minute. Then he said, "You are doing the method correctly, but you are losing yourself in the middle. Here," and he took the pencil she was holding and wrote 3 lines in the margin, and she leaned over to look, and something shifted in her expression. The watchfulness dropped. In its place came something more open. "Oh," she said. "Yes," he said. From then on, the evenings in Akosua's compound had a shape to them. Baba Kwame and Maame at the table after supper, the exercise books open between them, his voice low and patient, going through the work. Her voice occasionally resistant, occasionally surprised, increasingly, over the days that followed, simply engaged. Akosua would finish the washing up and sit nearby in the dark and listen to them, and she would feel the particular warmth of watching something she had hoped for her daughter beginning to happen in her own compound. She had been trying to find money for extra tutoring for 2 years. The school results had not been bad, but they had not been enough for the scholarship Maame needed. And here was a man who had spent 31 years teaching, sitting in her compound in the evenings with nowhere else to be, and what he had to give was exactly what her daughter needed. She did not say this out loud. She did not analyze the coincidence of it, because she was not a woman who spent time analyzing. She simply watched it happen and was grateful. And she kept the fire going, and she made the food, and she soaked his knee in salted water every evening, and she did not tell him how much any of it cost, because cost was not the language of what this had become. The village had opinions. This was expected. Asokwa was a village, and villages have opinions the way the harmattan has dust, abundantly, freely, without being asked. Auntie Amma came on the 4th day. She came in the late morning when Baba Kwame was sitting in the shade mending one of Mommy's school bags with the small needle and thread he kept in his green bag. And Akosua was in the back processing shea nuts. She stood at the compound gate and called in until Akosua came out, and then she pulled Akosua to the edge of the gate and spoke in the low, urgent voice of someone delivering information that they consider themselves brave to deliver. "We don't know who that man is," Auntie Amma said. "He was a teacher at the MA school," Akosua said. "You don't know that. He says that. He told me things about the school that only someone who worked there would know. That could be found out." "Auntie Amma," Akosua said patiently, "he is an old man with a sore knee who has nowhere to go. That is exactly what I'm concerned about." Auntie Amma's voice lowered further. "A man who has nowhere to go has a reason for having nowhere to go. Where is his family? Why is he alone? Where has he come from? You are a woman alone in this compound with a daughter and no man to protect you, and you have brought a stranger into your home, and nobody knows. I know, Akosua said. I know enough. Auntie Amma looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone who has said everything they can say and knows it has not landed. Then she said, "Your mother would not have approved," and she left. Opanyin Boateng came on the seventh day. He did not come personally. He sent his nephew, a young man named Kweku, who arrived at the gate and delivered the message with the uncomfortable formality of someone who knows the message is unreasonable, but has been sent by someone he cannot refuse. The message was that the elder wished Akosua to understand that taking in an unknown person was a responsibility that the village could not share, and that if anything were to happen, he did not specify what. It would be her matter and her matter alone. Akosua listened to the message. She thanked Kweku. She told him to thank Opanyin Boateng for his concern. Then she went back inside. That evening, she told Baba Kwame none of it. She told him only that the garden eggs were coming in early this year, which was a good sign for the season. He looked at her over the rim of his reading glasses. He was not a man who had spent 31 years reading the faces of children without developing a sensitivity to what was not being said. People are talking, he said. It was not a question. People always talk, she said. I don't want to be a trouble for you. You are not a trouble. She looked at him steadily. You are my teacher. You are here. That is the end of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you were always the one who finished arguments faster than they started. She looked at him. Good. Did I argue a lot as a child? Not in the way of a stubborn child, he said. More in the way of a child who had already decided what was right and was simply impatient with the time it took everyone else to catch up. She laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that comes out slightly surprised, and it changed the atmosphere of the compound the way a shift in wind changes an afternoon. Mommy looked up from her books. She had never heard her mother laugh quite like that. It was in the third week that the trouble came. Not the village kind of trouble, which was only words and could be outlasted. The other kind, the kind with paper. A man arrived at the compound on a Wednesday morning, a small man in a brown suit with a briefcase and an expression of professional regret that did not fully conceal a professional satisfaction. His name was Mr. Mpansa, and he worked for the District Credit Administration, and he had come, he said, to discuss the matter of the outstanding cooperative loan. He sat in the compound and he opened his briefcase and he removed a document and he laid it on the table between himself and Akosua. And he explained in the careful language of someone who has delivered this speech many times that the cooperative had been patient, which was true, and that the patience had run its course, which was also true, and that the matter had now reached a point where formal action was going to be taken regarding the security that had been offered against the loan. The security was the land, the strip of cocoa behind the house, and the land that Kofi had planted and that Akosua had been tending alone for 4 years, and that was the only piece of land in her name in the world. She looked at the document. She looked at the numbers. She looked at Mr. Ampansa's expression of professional regret. She was very still. I have been paying what I can each month, she said. Yes, and we have accounted for those payments, Mr. Ampansa said. But the agreement specified a full settlement by the end of this quarter, and the remaining balance, he pointed to a figure on the document, has not been addressed. The figure was not enormous. In the abstract, in a different life, it would not have been enormous. But in Akosua's life, at this moment, with the shea butter sales down because the harmattan had dried the nuts earlier than expected, and with the cooperative dividend delayed for the second consecutive season, it was a number that did not have a source. She looked at it, and she could not find where it would come from. How long do I have? She asked. 30 days from this notice, he said. He stood, closed his briefcase, adjusted his jacket. I am sorry, madam. I am only doing my job. He said this with the conviction of a man who has told himself this particular thing so many times that he has come to believe it entirely. He left. Akosua sat at the table with the document in front of her and said nothing for a long time. From the corner of the compound, Baba Kwame had watched all of it. He had been there when the man arrived, and he had not inserted himself. It was not his place, and he understood that, but he had heard every word. He sat quietly until Mr. Mpansa was gone, and the gate had closed, and the sound of his small car had faded down the red road. Then he rose from his stool and walked to the table and sat down across from Akosua. He did not say anything immediately. He looked at the document. She let him read it. "What is the amount?" he asked. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. "And your shea butter business, how much do you clear in a month?" She told him that too. All of it. The costs, the market fees, the cooperative deductions, the amount left after the household. She did not dress it up or make it worse than it was. Just the truth, the plain numbers. He listened. He looked at the document again, and he looked at his hands on the table. "I have something I need to tell you," he said. "If this story has found its way into your heart, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale from Village Heart. Your support is what keeps the fire burning, and more stories like this one coming your way." He reached into his green bag. He took out his Bible. He opened it to the back and removed, from between the last page and the back cover, a folded envelope that was soft with age, its edges worn and its color yellowed. The envelope of something that has been carried for a very long time. He laid it on the table and was quiet for a moment, as if gathering himself. "My father," he said, "was a farmer here in this district. Not in Asokwa, in a village called Frempong, 12 kilometers north. He farmed cocoa and cassava, and he was not a wealthy man, but he was a man who understood land. He understood that land was the one thing that stayed. He told me this many times when I was young." He paused. "When he died, he left me something. A piece of land, 6 plots, properly registered, on the road to the district capital. He had bought it piece by piece over 30 years. He wanted me to have it because I was the one who had stayed, the one who had not gone to the city. He said the land would take care of me." Akosua looked at the envelope. "I never pursued it," Baba Kwame said. "I was teaching. The land was there, but I never developed it, never registered the transfer fully in my name. My son knew about it. He knew, which is why—" He stopped. "When Emmanuel took me to the city after his mother died, I thought I would handle it from there, but somehow the months went by and then the years, and I kept telling myself there was time, and then—" He stopped again. He pressed his lips together. He opened the envelope. Inside was a land title document, yellowed, folded to the creases of years, but bearing the official stamp of the District Lands Commission, and at the bottom, the name Asante, Kofi Mensa, his father, and below it, in a separate hand, a notation of transfer. But that was not all. He removed a second document. This one was newer, stiffer paper, less worn. He placed it beside the first. It was a letter, on the letterhead of a major Ghanaian development company, dated 14 months ago. Akosua looked at it. The language was formal, corporate, the kind of writing that uses 3 words where one would do. But the meaning came through clearly enough. The company had identified the 6 plots on the district capital road as land they wished to acquire for a commercial development project. They had traced the ownership through land records. They had been attempting to reach the registered heir, one Kwame Asante, through an intermediary who had last known address of Emmanuel Asante in the city. The offer figure was printed clearly in the middle of the second paragraph. Akosua read it. She read it again. "They have been trying to reach me," Baba Kwame said quietly, "for over a year. I found this letter last month. It had been sent to Emmanuel's house, and his wife, he paused, had kept it. I found it in my bag the night I was brought to the bus station. I believe she put it there thinking it was nothing, or perhaps thinking that once I was gone, the matter would somehow resolve itself in their favor. He looked at his hands. She did not understand that without my signature, the sale cannot proceed. Without me, the land remains in my father's name indefinitely. The compound was completely quiet. Akosua looked at the letter. She looked at the figure. She looked at Baba Kwame's face, the face of a 72-year-old man who had been left at a bus station with one coin, who had walked 11 kilometers in the Harmattan heat, who had been turned away by a village elder and a pastor's wife and a man selling frozen drinks. And she said nothing because there were no words available for what she was feeling. The compound held all of it in its silence. The amount needed to clear your debt, Baba Kwame said. I have it. I have had it the whole time without knowing it mattered to anyone here. Your land should not be touched. He folded his hands on the table. I am going to go to the District Lands Commission tomorrow. I am going to complete the registration in my name, and I am going to pay what you owe the cooperative. Baba Kwame, this is not a gift, he said, firmly but gently in the voice of a man who has spent 31 years managing the emotions of rooms. A gift implies that the giver has more than enough and the receiver has too little. That is not what this is. What this is, he looked at her steadily, is someone who was taken in and fed and given a place to sleep and whose knee was soaked in warm water without being asked. Someone whose granddaughter, he stopped and corrected himself, whose student's daughter is now, thanks to the evenings at this table, going to sit the BECE examination next year with a real chance. He paused. This is not a gift. This is a debt being paid in the only currency I have left. She opened her mouth. She closed it. Beside, he said, and something in his voice shifted. Something that was almost, not quite, but almost, the edge of a smile. Your mother used to send me garden eggs at the end of every school term. For 20 years. Do you know how many garden eggs that is? She pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were very bright. The Lands Commission visit took 3 days and required 4 different offices and 2 return trips and a great deal of patience that Baba Kwame turned out to still have in considerable supply. Akosua went with him. On the second day, when a clerk told them that the documentation was insufficient and they would need to come back, the clerk looked up and found 2 pairs of eyes looking at him with the particular combined patience of a woman who has been managing a debt for 4 years and an old man who has been waiting for justice considerably longer, and he seemed to reconsider the insufficiency. On the 3rd day, the transfer was complete. On the 4th day, Baba Kwame went to the cooperative office and settled Akosua's account in full. He did not tell anyone he was doing this. Akosua knew. Maame knew. Nobody else needed to. But Asokwa was a village, and villages always know. The news moved through the compound areas the way water finds its level, quietly, irresistibly, filling every available space. First it was a rumor, then a confirmation, and then a story that had already been told so many times in 1 week that it had acquired the quality of something older, something that felt as if it had always been true and was only now being remembered. The old man that Opanyan Boateng had turned away from his gate. The old man the pastor's wife had said there was no room for. The old man that Auntie Ama had called dangerous and motherless and a stranger. That old man had sat in Akosua Frempong's compound and eaten her food and let her soak his knee and tutored her daughter by firelight. And it turned out that his father had left him 6 plots of land on the district capital road, and that a development company had been trying to find him for over a year, and that the amount he had now received for those plots was enough to clear every debt in Asokwa twice over. Opanyan Boateng did not come to the compound to say anything. This was noted. His silence was, in its way, louder than anything he might have said. Auntie Ama came on a Friday afternoon with a covered dish, groundnut soup, the kind that takes most of a day to make properly. She set it on the table and looked at it rather than at Akosua, and said that she had made too much and thought perhaps it could be shared. Akosua accepted it. She did not say anything about it beyond thank you, because Akosua was not a woman who used the moment of someone's shame to settle scores. She accepted the soup and she served it, and the four of them, herself, Maame, Baba Kwame, and Auntie Ama, ate together in the compound as the evening came in. The conversation was ordinary and small and warm. Only Mami, looking at her mother over the rim of her bowl, caught the small private expression that crossed Akosua's face, something that was not victory but was close to its quieter cousin. The expression of a woman who was right and always knew she was right and feels no need to announce it. Baba Kwame stayed. He stayed through the dry season and into the rains, which came late that year but came heavily, filling the river and darkening the soil, and setting the cocoa on Akosua Strip into the best growth it had seen in 4 years. He stayed while Mami sat the BECE examination and passed with marks that made her teacher at the school come personally to the compound to congratulate her mother. He stayed while Akosua expanded her shea butter operation. With the stability of no debt and the compound's improved circumstances, into a small collective, may bringing 3 other women in the village into the work and increasing what each of them earned. He became part of the compound, not loudly, quietly the way a tree becomes part of a landscape. You look one day and it is simply there, and you cannot fully remember the time before it. He walked with Mommy to school in the mornings when his knee allowed. He mended things. He rose early and started the fire. He read his Bible and he soaked his knee. And he talked to Akosua in the evenings about things, about the village, about the country, about life, about the children he had taught, about Abina, about the years, about what it meant to have lived long enough to see certain truths confirmed. One evening he told her about Emmanuel. Not everything, not in one telling, but enough. The room in the city, the drive to the bus station, the coin. He told it the way he told everything, plainly without drama, as if it were something that had happened to someone else, and he was simply reporting it accurately. Akosua listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Are you angry with him?" she asked. Baba Kwame thought about this seriously, the way he considered everything, not rushing to the answer. "No," he said finally. "I am sad for him. Anger needs somewhere to go. Sadness just sits with you and eventually becomes something else." He paused. "I prayed for him. I still pray for him. A man who can do what he did to his father." He stopped. "Carry something very heavy. I would not want to carry that." Akosua looked at the fire. "He will come one day," Baba Kwame said. Not as a threat, not as a prediction exactly. More as the observation of a man who has lived long enough to know that the things we do find their way back to us. He will come when life has done to him what life does to people who close their doors. Akosua said nothing. She put more wood on the fire. Let the years pass the way years pass in a village where things are growing. Not in a rush, in the way of seasons, each one bringing something, taking something, leaving the land different but not unrecognizable. In the way of trees that grow so slowly, you forget you are watching growth until one day you look up and the shade has changed. 10 years. Mommy finished school and won a scholarship to the University of Ghana at Legon. She studied economics. She came home in the holidays and sat with Baba Kwame in the evenings and showed him what she was learning. And he listened with the satisfaction of a man whose work has grown legs and walked further than he could follow. In her third year, she won a prize for a paper she wrote on agricultural cooperatives in rural Ghana. In the acknowledgments she wrote, "To Baba Kwame, who first showed me that learning is not about what you are given, but about what you decide to do with it." The Shea Butter Collective became a registered enterprise. 6 women, then 12, then 20. A small processing facility on the edge of the village, funded in part by a district development grant that Akosua had written the application for herself. A long, careful, thoroughly documented application that had taken her 3 evenings to complete, and that the district officer had later told her was the most professionally prepared application he had received from a village enterprise in 7 years. Baba Kwame's health remained by the stubborn grace of a body that has decided it has more to do. His knee still ached in the cold. His eyes required stronger glasses, but he was present. He was alive. He was in the compound every morning when the fire was lit, and every evening when the food was ready. And he had become so woven into the fabric of Akosua's household that Maame, when speaking to her university friends, referred to him without thinking as her grandfather. He was 82 years old. And then one morning, a dry season Thursday as it happened, the kind of morning that circles back through the years with its harmattan dust and its particular quality of light, someone knocked on the compound gate. Akosua was in the processing room. Her assistant, a young woman named Abena, named for Baba Kwame's wife, at his quiet suggestion, the year the collective was formed, called out that there was a man at the gate. She said he looked tired. She said he looked like he had come a long way. Akosua wiped her hands on her cloth. She walked to the gate. She opened it. The man standing on the other side was perhaps 40 years old, though he looked older. Not in the way that prosperity adds years to a face, not the heavy, settled look of a man in middle age who has too much and worries about keeping it. The other kind of older. The kind that comes from years of sleeping badly and eating uncertainly and carrying something that was never going to get lighter. His clothes were clean but thin. His shoes were still good. Good shoes are the last thing a man gives up, but they were very nearly done. He held a small bag at his side. He looked at her, and she looked at him. She had never met Emmanuel Asante. She had no photograph of him, no description beyond what his father had offered in the occasional quiet evening conversation. But she had been a woman who paid attention to faces for 48 years, and now 58. And she was a woman who listened when people spoke and filed what she heard. And there was something in the line of this man's jaw, something in the way he held his hands that she recognized before she had decided to. He said, "Good morning. Madam, I am sorry to trouble you. I was told in the village that this compound sometimes has work for people who need it." His voice was even, careful, the voice of a man who has learned to say what he needs without revealing how much he needs it. She recognized that too. "What kind of work?" she asked. "Any kind." A pause. "I am not particular." She looked at him for a long moment. Behind her in the compound, the processing room was running, the sound of women working, the smell of the nuts, the good ordinary noise of a living enterprise. She thought about the man inside who had told her 10 years ago that a man who can do what he did to his father carries something very heavy. She thought about the man inside who was 82 years old and who still rose before her in the mornings to start the fire. "Come in," she said. We hesitated, just slightly. The hesitation of a man who has been turned away from enough gates that walking through one feels like something that requires careful handling. "Come in," she said again. He came through the gate. She closed it behind him, and then she said, quietly, carefully, watching his face, "Wait here one moment." She walked across the compound toward the far side, where an old man sat in his chair in the morning shade, his Bible on his knee, his reading glasses on, his lips moving slightly over the words. She stopped beside him. She put her hand on his shoulder. "Baba Kwame," she said softly, "there is someone at the gate." He looked up, and over her shoulder across the compound, his eyes found the man standing just inside. The world went very still. An old man and a son he had not seen in 10 years. And separated by 30 feet of swept red earth and a decade of things done and undone and lived with and prayed over. The son could not see his father's eyes from where he stood. He was still looking at Akosua, still trying to understand why she had not simply pointed him toward the work. He had not yet looked far enough across the compound, but Baba Kwame saw his son. He took off his reading glasses. He placed them carefully on top of his Bible. He folded his hands in his lap, and he sat very still, the way a man sits when he is managing something large inside himself, making sure it does not come out in the wrong way. His face did something that was hard to name, not anger, not joy, something older and quieter than either, something that had been waited for. "Tell him," Baba Kwame said very softly, "hurry to come and sit down." Akosua walked back to Emmanuel. "Come," she said. He followed her across the compound, and then he saw him, his father, 82 years old, alive, sitting in the morning shade like something rooted and permanent. Emmanuel stopped walking. The bag fell from his hand. "Baba." The word came out broken. A man reduced to one syllable, to the first word he ever learned. Baba Kwame looked at his son for a long time. Then he opened his arms. Emmanuel crossed the compound and went to his knees and wept. Akosua turned away. She went inside and put the water on. Some doors, when you finally knock on them, turn out to be the door you were always meant to find. You just had to lose everything first to deserve the opening. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. If it moved you, I think you'll find a home in the other videos on your screen right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come join us. There's always a place by the fire at Village Heart. Until next time.